Hello everyone, I'm the Enforcer, and welcome to the breaking news. Please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and support us on Patreon, link in the description below. Moving on into our first breaking news of the day, the 205th Motorized Rifle Brigade appears to have suffered some heavy casualties near the area of Nova Khakovka after a decisive Ukrainian artillery strike. A small video clip came out from one of the Russian soldiers that was inside of this convoy, showing the damage to the column. We can see here multiple destroyed Russian supply trucks, and we can even see some going further down the street. And as the camera pans even further back, we can see more damaged supply trucks as the road goes on. The 205th Motorized Rifle Brigade is supposedly the unit that placed the explosive charges onto the Nova Khakovka Dam, which led to its subsequent destruction in early June of this year. The destruction of these forces in this area is most likely going to cause a weakening of Russian positions around the area of Kazachi Lakhari, where Ukrainian forces still hold the village and the Russians are attempting to push them back out. This means that the Russians will, of course, not have a strategic reserve to work off of, and that means the Ukrainians' foothold in this area may continue to be quite strong and continue to hold on for quite some while. We've also heard today that apparently Russian DNA testing, for whatever that can be assumed, has confirmed that Prigozhin's remains were inside of the wreckage. This came out from Clash Report, stating that the Russian Investigative Committee confirmed the death of the Wagner founder Yevgeny Prigozhin in a plane crash in the Tver region. They say that DNA testing confirmed that Prigozhin was inside the plane, but of course we have to remember that it is a Russian investigative organization. Their statements can't always be taken as true and cannot be taken as at face value. Of course, I would actually go through a lot of reasons why the Russians cannot be taken at face value, but I'm fairly certain that most of y'all have been around for quite a while in this war and have seen that many Russian statements are proven to be untrue or flat out false whenever given the chance, usually within 24 hours. So we're going to be taking that with a grain of salt for the moment. We are assuming that Prigozhin's dead, but at the same time, we always have to give Russian investigative committees, or Russian agencies, for that matter, a massive leeway, especially when it comes to the news that they report. But at the moment, it does appear that Prigozhin has been officially confirmed dead by the Russian government. Speaking of which, one thing that is appearing to die is the Russian soldiers' will to fight, as we're starting to hear from the Institute for the Study of War that mutinies are still occurring within a decent amount of Russian units, especially in the southern land bridge area, due to lack of pay and also low morale. According to the statement from the Institute for the Study of War, Russian irregular formations, such as the Rosguardia or other conscript units, remain willing to threaten to withdraw from combat unilaterally, despite recent efforts by Russian military command to purge and suppress insubordination. Insubordination has always been an issue in the Russian military during this war, especially since the Russians can't really rely on contract soldiers that just have the will to be there through their own mindset. A lot of these conscripts don't want to be there, and because of that, the morale is already somewhat low, and it becomes even lower, especially when you put in low pay, no supplies, and no equipment being given to these soldiers. It makes them not really happy to be in the war. The Russians have been trying to counter this as much as possible by throwing Russian dissenters into pits. And I don't mean throwing them into pits and killing them, but just putting them into a basement in a pit and then just leaving them there for days with hardly any food or water and hoping that that breaks their will, among many other things. We've even seen summary frontline executions conducted because of insubordination. However, it doesn't really appear to be causing any kind of change, at least in the conscript or the normal Russian soldier's mindset. We still see that mutinies are as common and prevalent as they have been throughout the war, and it also appears that we're getting a marked uptick in surrenders as well, at least within the past 48 hours, that may also be showing that these attempts are not really helping to solve the situation. They're more so making the situation even worse. And they're not just going over and attacking the lower enlisted, such as your equivalent of privates or corporals in Western militaries. They're also starting to go for junior officers and senior NCOs as well, whenever they speak out about the terrible conditions and poor planning of the Russian military. Another statement from the Institute for the Study of War here says that the Russian Ministry of Defense is reportedly prosecuting the junior officers and soldiers of a Russian military unit that complained about senior commanders' inattention to frontline issues, following an MOD pattern of deflecting blame away from senior officers. Deflecting blame away from senior officers is a bit of a par for the course for the corruption of the Russian army, or mostly any armies around the world. But the fact that they're attacking junior officers and NCOs, the actual guys who are conducting the battle on the front lines, and actually giving the Russians even a slither of a fighting chance, is also something to note that things are going incredibly poorly for the Russian forces in that area. The Russian forces are insubordinate and mutinying due to lack of pay and low morale, and not only that, even junior officers are pointing out the major discrepancies and shortcomings of the Russian army as the war continues on. And this is also beginning to show us why Russian forces are starting to crumble at a bit of a faster pace within the past few days than they have been throughout the rest of the Ukrainian counteroffensive. It may be a culmination of junior officers, NCOs, being removed from their positions due to speaking out against the Russian military, and it also may be the fact that some units are just beginning to mutiny, or they're beginning to decide that due to a lack of pay or supplies, they would rather retreat and fight another day further back behind the lines than to doggedly fight for every single inch of ground like they have been during the first month of the counteroffensive. Even then, corruption is a fairly big issue, and one that both sides have been dealing with. Although the Ukrainians have been dealing with it less than the Russians, corruption is still somewhat rife. President Zelensky was elected into the position of president of Ukraine in 2019 on campaign promises that he would remove corruption from the Ukrainian system, or at least produce a Ukrainian governmental structure that did not encourage or foster the ideas or the continuance of any kind of corruption. And it appears that he is starting to move greatly in that direction today, as he's now made a statement today saying that he wants to equate corruption, specifically in wartime, with treason, meaning that the punishments for corruption of any sort will be similar to the punishments for treason. This is an interesting move and is continuing on largely in his policies that he was elected on, in saying that he would be trying to fight corruption. Of course, right now the scope is somewhat limited. It's not trying to equate corruption to treason in every instance, but during wartime it's trying to equate corruption to treason. This is most likely a baby step in the right direction, trying to move towards the idea of corruption being a serious crime in Ukraine. But of course, the best way to market it at the moment to get it through the Rada is to make it sound like it is just a wartime event. But once the corruption is quashed, and hopefully quashed quickly, they will most likely move into making corruption comparable to treason in any situation, even during peacetime. But absolutely great to see that President Zelensky is continuing on his campaign promises of trying to remove corruption from the Ukrainian system, and of course, it's been a struggle. While we are pro-Ukrainian on this channel, one could not deny that Ukraine does have a significant problem with corruption. Being a former Soviet republic, corruption is largely built into the system, even after they became independent countries in 1991. Many of y'all will know that many of these countries are still corrupt to this day and still trying to battle with it. The Belarusians are, of course, corrupt to the core. Many other countries like Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, and Tajikistan have all either had dictatorships or incredibly corrupt bureaucracies formed that do not foster any kind of true democracy or fight corruption whatsoever. The corruption is, in fact, encouraged. Ukraine, being a former Soviet republic, has had to deal with that problem a pretty good bit. And of course, over the past 30 years, there have been concerted efforts within the nation of Ukraine to fight corruption and remove it completely. All of these have either culminated in failure or minimal successes until President Zelensky, and it does appear that Zelensky is taking a far more spearheaded attempt at getting rid of the corruption than any former presidents of Ukraine have. And I gotta say, the efforts certainly need to be applauded, as it is going to be helping Ukraine to be brought forward into the rest of the Western world, and also bring them up to a Western standard as far as corruption goes. Corruption will not be eliminated completely. Of course, many of y'all watching this channel are probably from countries outside of Ukraine, and y'all all know that corruption still occurs within political systems. Even if corruption is completely irreprehensible, it will still happen. But the hope is that corruption will be far less, or very little, compared to what it is now. Moving on from regards of corruption and back into the Russian frontline situation, or more so, the Russian diplomatic situation with the rest of the world, it appears that there may have been a minor or major escalation, depending on how you view this, today, as the U.S.S. Gerald R Ford, the largest aircraft carrier in the world, has moored at the port of Antalya inside of Turkey today. We actually got a couple of pictures of the Gerald R Ford here from Nexta, and it is absolutely amazing to see the flagship of practically the entire U.S. Navy at this point. It is the flagship of its fleet, but not the flagship of the entire Navy. Of course, you can only be the flagship of a fleet. But anyways, it is an amazing aircraft carrier, and great to see that the United States is bringing its aircraft carrier around the world. Well, one of its 10 or 11 supercarriers around the world at this point to show the force and resolve of the United States of America. The port of call being in Turkey is probably a deliberate decision, especially considering that the Russians are directly to the opposite side, to the north of Turkey, and are currently in a bit of a political, well, more so of a diplomatic standoff with the United States. In this picture, we can see that a decent amount of the aircraft have been brought up to the flight deck, and we can see that it's more largely F-18s. We're not seeing a lot of F-35s in this picture. And in the next one, we can also see the Gerald R Ford from the shoreline. And then in this last picture here, we can also see a family looking out to sea and seeing the Gerald R Ford out there. The Gerald R Ford, of course, is also not only the largest supercarrier in the world, it is the most advanced technologically, and also carries the most aircraft than any other aircraft carrier afloat at the moment. And so it's certainly sending a message to the Russians, if anything, that the United States is ready to go at any given moment, and the abilities of the U.S. Navy, or the U.S. military at large, is far greater and dwarfs the Russian military in spades. But that is most of the major news that we had today. I thank every single one of y'all so much once again for watching. If y'all did enjoy, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, as we put videos like this out every single day of the week, nearly, whenever there's major news to cover. And so with that, thank you all so much once again for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.